Hello and welcome to Follow the Bookkeeper. I am your host, Morgan Trine. So today we are going to be talking about why my firm, Honestly Bookkeeping, doesn't use QuickBooks Online. And we'll have a whole other episode about what we use instead. Spoiler, it's called Xero, Xero. But today is solely going to be focused on QuickBooks Online. And this episode is going to be really helpful to you if you use QuickBooks and hate it, or if you are thinking about what software to start using for your business or switch to, and you don't know what else is out there. QuickBooks Online has sort of the market share currently in the US. And so it ends up being a default decision for a lot of business owners just to use QuickBooks because they don't know anything else. And this is going to get into all of the reasons that we don't use QuickBooks, why we don't use it, and then hopefully that can help you think about what you really need as you go through your decision about what software to use. Now, this is going to be exclusively talking about QuickBooks Online. There is a QuickBooks Desktop and a QuickBooks Self-Employed, which are other options offered by Intuit, which is the parent company of QuickBooks. And we're not going to be talking about those. This is purely QuickBooks Online. So the main issues that we have with QuickBooks Online goes into two big categories. The first is functionality reasons, pretty big reason, and then also some ethical concerns. So if you're someone whose business has some sort of like social good, B Corp. If you think about corporate ethics at all, then this is definitely going to be something you're going to want to listen to. So in terms of the functionality, so first I have some just like little gripes on functionality that in the scheme of things don't make a huge difference, but all taken together do. So the first thing is that in general, QuickBooks Online is taking the paper process of bookkeeping, right? Because bookkeeping was originally handwritten in ledgers. And so it's taking that process and basically just putting it into an online format. And so it means that some things that were necessary when you had to handwrite, but aren't necessary when you have a computer doing things in the back end, are still part of the process in QuickBooks Online. And so this is one of those things where I see bookkeepers who are older or did do something either paper-based or like before cloud accounting, tend to really like QuickBooks Online because it has that familiar functionality format. Whereas I came into bookkeeping after, cloud accounting had already been around. And so I didn't have that history of working on paper bookkeeping. And so there's some redundancies in QuickBooks that just like the software can do behind the scenes. Why am I having to do it? So that's one thing. Another issue is the user interface. So if you had like a big desktop computer, if you had dual monitors or something like that, this wouldn't be an issue. But I work exclusively on my laptop because I travel a lot. And so when you're in the banking tab screen of QuickBooks Online, where you're actually like putting in the categories, saying, here was a payment to Office Depot for printer paper, right? The screen where you enter that information in is just the bottom half to a third of the screen, whereas the top half is a static. And so you're having to scroll in a very narrow section, which is just really hard to see like the full scope of how many transactions are there. When you pop that out to enter in the information, it now takes up more screen space. So it makes it so there's not a lot of white space, and it's very difficult to like see the whole scope, to see the whole page. And just for how my brain works, like that small space to be entering the majority of our information for like the day-to-day, week-to-week transaction just is not nice. It makes it harder to just do our job as well, I find. And then another sort of small functionality issue I have is that the breadcrumbs are not good. So the breadcrumbs, right, are those like hyperlinks in the upper left corner that sort of show you where you are, like where you started. And as you click into further and further screens, you don't have the ability to use the breadcrumbs to go back to your original screen. So let's use the example of, say you're looking at your profit and loss report, and you want to look into that marketing line to see, okay, what transactions make up that total. So first of all, you can't open that up as a second tab. So you have to click in. So if you're trying to look at like 4 different categories and see what transactions are in those categories, you can't open up 4 different tabs and just go through, look at them, and then pop back to the main report. You have to click in to one category at a time. So, okay, we're on the profit and loss. We click into the marketing tab and we see, a list of transactions there. At this point, you can use the back button or the breadcrumb button to go back to the profit and loss. But if you are seeing a transaction and you're like, what's going on there? When you click into that, then you can't go back. So you get stuck in looking at that transaction and being able to click into the various hyperlinks on that transaction record. But you can't, at least at this time of recording, you can't click back to get to the report. Or you have to use like the back buttons. There's no breadcrumbs anymore. And then say you're on that transaction and you want to look at the audit history. So, and again, this is very important as a bookkeeper. So you click on that audit history, it takes you to see, that audit history, what's going on. When you click back, it gets you to that transaction. If you hit back again, it takes you back to the audit report. So it gets you in this loop where like you can't get out of looking at either the transaction or the audit history. And there's a bunch of other places in QuickBooks where this is true too. You click in and then it gets you in this cycle where you can't get back to where you started. And so if your goal was, okay, I'm looking at my profit and loss and trying to understand what's going on here, you're now in this rabbit hole, this circular loop of this transaction. You have to go all the way back out to reports, find the report again, reset the date that you were looking at, reset the settings, and then be able to see that profit and loss statement again. So it just causes some extra hassle, especially when you're trying to not just look, get the report and move on. When you're trying to actually look at those transactions, it makes it very hard to do that process. You have to like keep sort of going back to a point in that process that, in my opinion, is way too many steps. Like make it so that we can easily investigate and get back to where we started. So those are sort of the 3 like smaller functionality pieces that I just have major gripes with, right? And like if this was all it was, fine, like it would be okay. But now we're getting into some bigger functionality issues. So one of them is that QuickBooks Online doesn't have an open API. And what this means is it makes integrations very, very difficult. And so you have to use their app marketplace if you're trying to do some certain integrations. And unfortunately, that app marketplace isn't super robust. So for instance, if you use Stripe as your payment processor, the integration for getting Stripe into QuickBooks Online, there isn't like a native integration with that. So you have to pay for some software to do that integration for you, or you have to have extra manual entry steps when you see that Stripe transaction in your bank account. And so what I see a lot is there's a huge like secondary market for apps that integrate with QuickBooks. And so a lot of the bookkeepers I see that use and love QuickBooks Online end up having to use all of these other apps in conjunction to do some of these functionality pieces that in many cases are free with our preferred software. So it also makes it so that if you have some sort of custom software that you use, a lot of our clients have custom software they've developed, you can't integrate that with Xero. And so it means that you're very limited in what you can do. And it means that if you have a third-party bookkeeper, if you're not the one doing your bookkeeping, and you have this custom software that you've created, there's much more manual entry that has to happen to get the information from that custom software that you have into QuickBooks. And it requires a lot more manual data entry going on. Another issue that we have in terms of functionality is the plans. So their plans are set up so that if our clients were on QuickBooks, I don't know, 90% of them could use the basic plan, except the basic plan does not allow you to customize reports. And so you are stuck using these very basic reports in the basic plan that most businesses would be able to use that basic plan except for the reports. And so it places advisors in a position where you either have to upsell, hey, you have to go to the highest paid plan in order for us to get all of the reports that we need to be able to answer the questions you have. Or it requires us as bookkeepers to say, okay, we'll keep you on this basic plan that has all of the other bookkeeping functionalities that you need, but we're going to have to export reports for you into Excel, do all of this editing and formatting ourselves in order to be able to answer the questions you have as a business owner. That's a whole bunch of extra manual work that we're having to do as bookkeepers. And then if you have say, okay, now can you do this for the previous year instead of just the previous month? We're having to redo that whole manual process for these reports. And so it's a very difficult situation because these plans, how they set those plans up, sort of pushes people into higher and higher paid plans just to get some pretty basic, in my opinion, features that should be included. And the final issue on the functionality side is not quite function-based, but it's the support. So support is notoriously horrible. There's a lot of super long wait times. I've been on hold for over an hour a lot of times. And you'll then get connected and then it'll drop. It's very, very common to get contradictory answers. So you'll go to support and you'll, start typing and be like, okay, here's the things that I need help with. And then you'll get the basic, oh, here's how to do it, help article. And it's no, that's not my issue. It's not that I need to know how to do it. It's that this process isn't working. And then trying to get support to understand that. And then sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, that's not our division. You need to go over to this other division. And then that other division says, oh, that's not our division. You need to go back to the first division. So it ends up being an infuriating process. And to the point where we stopped contacting support because we knew we weren't going to get the answers that we needed. And so, you have better luck, or in my experience, we've had better luck asking other bookkeepers who use QuickBooks Online a lot, how do you solve for X? Or just Googling and looking through some of those Q&A and forum sections of hey, I'm having this issue, just because support really doesn't show up and help in the way that it really should. And so what it means is if there's an issue, if something goes wrong, there's nothing in place to really support you with figuring out how to get that fixed and solved. And so again, if you are working with a bookkeeper who uses and loves QuickBooks, then you're probably not going to have to deal with that. But if you are doing your bookkeeping yourself and run into an issue, it's going to be a big issue because support is probably not going to be able to help. Or if you are working with a bookkeeper and like they get to a point where like they can't figure it out, it requires finding support in other places than actual QuickBooks Online support. So that is sort of the final functionality piece that really is part of the determining factors in why we don't use QuickBooks. So that covers sort of the functionality side of things. In terms of the second main reason that we don't use QuickBooks, and this is ethics. And so sort of like we mentioned with the plans, there's that like need for, or sort of encouragement for advisors to upsell plans in order to get basic functionalities that you need as a bookkeeper. Right. And so the marketing practices there, just keep always pushing you into higher and higher plans. And that's sort of their answer. Oh, you're having an issue. This higher tier plan is going to solve it for you. And so that sort of practice of marketing, I know that there's a ton of businesses around that do marketing like that. I don't like it. It doesn't jive with me. And so it rubs me the wrong way. And if I can not work with a company that has that type of persona, I'm not going to do it. Another part of this is their merchant services division. So this was true. I don't know if they've updated this, but one of the things that they did is their merchant services division is the way that you can accept money through QuickBooks, right? So you have an invoice. If you have a merchant services account, you can send that invoice and your customer or client can pay using that QuickBooks payment processor. Well, when you first set it up, all of the default settings charge you the highest fee, right? So like if you want instant payout, you have a higher fee. And so it sets that as the default. So if you're just like going and setting this up and like not thinking about it, they're banking on the people who just want to like click, yep, accept, set up, and not think about it further. Those people end up getting charged higher fees. You have to know to go in and like check all of your settings to make sure, you're getting charged for what you want to be charged. If you actually want that instant payout, okay, here's the fee associated. I do want that. And you can make that choice. And so you have to be, if you don't know, you have to be thoughtful and like look through all of those settings to make sure you understand and have things set up how you actually want them. Or as a bookkeeping firm, you have to know this and have that conversation with your client. Okay, what do you actually want? What fees are you okay with having? And then go in and set those up. And so again, it's, some tactics that make the default beneficial for QuickBooks and its parent company Intuit over its actual users. Another, this isn't quite ethical, an ethical consideration, but it definitely rubbed a ton of bookkeepers and bookkeeping firms the wrong way. Several years ago, QuickBooks Online came out with an offering for like QuickBooks bookkeepers. And so if you are a small business owner and you don't have a bookkeeper that you're working with right now and you want to, you can have QuickBooks assign you a bookkeeper that will do your bookkeeping for you. Now that's separate from the QuickBooks Advisor. And so most bookkeepers and bookkeeping firms are on the QuickBooks Advisor advisory, right? It's a list of bookkeepers who are certified through QuickBooks and like you can find people to work with. And so those two services are a little bit in conflict with one another, right? And like QuickBooks offering these like internal bookkeepers hasn't, led to the demise of the small bookkeeping firm. Like, we're still out here, we're still thriving. But what it did do was make a lot of bookkeepers and accountants very upset with QuickBooks, because it felt like kind of a snub, like, hey, you say that you value us, you say that we're like partners in helping small businesses, and then you're putting up a service that seems to be in competition with me and, if you work at a firm, my firm. And so that, just like doesn't feel great. And again, like, our firm doesn't get anything from the QuickBooks advisory, right? Like, I didn't really have a horse in this race, but it speaks to a prioritization of QuickBooks and Intuit over their partners and their, small business owners. And then the last thing is not directly bookkeeping related or QuickBooks related, but the parent company of QuickBooks is called Intuit, and Intuit recently settled a lawsuit from defrauding low-income taxpayers because they should have been eligible. They were eligible for filing taxes for free. So if you make under a certain income threshold, and that threshold changes every year. I think this year in 2023, it's like 75,000, 70,000. It also depends on your state. You can file your taxes for free. And all of the major tax filing softwares have to offer that option. Like, it's a legal requirement. And yet there were marketing practices, Intuit being the worst, but, H&R Block and other tax softwares also were part of this, did marketing so that a ton of low-income filers were sort of led to believe that they had to pay for TurboTax, like a higher tier of TurboTax, in order to file their taxes. And so that lawsuit was just settled, and like the settlement claims have been going out. But again, it speaks to just some deceptive practices, and again, an environment of putting the profit, the QuickBooks and Intuit profit, as the most important, as the North Star for the company. And so when I take all of these things into consideration, the functionalities and sort of the ethical considerations, as a firm, we decided, nope, we're not going to work with QuickBooks anymore. That just doesn't align with how we want to operate. And that we know that there's other solutions out there that are great, that do fit within these sort of our criteria for what we want in terms of the functionalities and ethics, and that we didn't have to use QuickBooks. And so that is one of the requirements, is everyone who works with our firm, Honestly Bookkeeping, has to switch over to Xero. And that's just what it is. And partly, again, that's because of how our systems work. Again, we're very systems-based, we're very process-based. And so these QuickBooks does not fit within our methodology. And that's partly why we chose to use a different software. And so again, all of this to say that if you love QuickBooks, right? Great. It clearly works for you. But if you don't love QuickBooks or you're agnostic, there are other options out there. Because at the end of the day, like, a good bookkeeping software is something that produces accurate information and fits in with how your brain functions and how your business operates. And that's sort of the main thing that you have to be thinking about. And so again, that's why we choose a different software, is because how we set our business operations up, how our clients tend to set their business operations up, does not work with QuickBooks. So that is the overview for why we don't use QuickBooks at Honestly Bookkeeping. Hopefully you found some of this helpful or informative. If you have questions, please let me know. I would love to, respond and answer to any questions or concerns that came up from this episode. And if you found this helpful and you know of someone that they would also find this beneficial, please share it with them. So thank you so much. This was Follow the Bookkeeper.